Remember that guy we met at the party? Oh, the one who told funniest stories? Exactly. He's the guy whose sister works at the bookstore downtown. The bookstore where I bought that mystery novel? Yes, that's the one. By the way, I also met someone yesterday whose dog won the local pet show. Really? The pet show we were talking about last week? Yep, the same one. And guess what? His dog, which has the cutest spots, won first place. Wow, that's amazing. I wish I had a pet whose talents could win awards. Well, maybe you'll meet someone at the upcoming pet fair whose funny friend has some impressive tricks. That would be cool. Let's go together and find a pet whose talents can rival the best. If you liked the video until now, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell and like. If you are learning English, you are probably come across relative clauses. They are a common feature of English grammar and they can be tricky to master. But don't worry, with a little practice, you'll soon be using them with ease. In this video, we'll explore what relative clauses are, the different types of relative clauses, and how to form them. We'll also look at some common mistakes and give you some tips to help you avoid them. So let's start learning. What is relative clauses? A relative clause is a kind of dependent clause that helps modify a noun or pronoun in your main clause. In other words, it provides additional information about noun or pronoun. For example, the book that I'm reading is really good. In this sentence, that I'm reading is a relative clause that modifies the noun book. It tells us which book we are talking about. Now let's take a closer look at the two types of relative clauses. 1. Defining relative clauses, and 2. Non-defining relative clauses. Defining relative clauses. These clauses are essential to the meaning of the sentence. They provide crucial information that identifies the noun or pronoun in sentence. For example, the woman who lives in that room is a doctor. In this sentence, who lives in that room is a defining relative clause that tells us which woman we are talking about. Without this information, the sentence would be incomplete. Defining relative clauses can be introduced by a range of words, including who, whom, whose, which, and that. We'll cover these words in more detail later. Non-defining relative clauses. Non-defining relative clauses offer additional information about a noun or pronoun, but they are not essential to the meaning of the sentence. For example, my mother, who is a teacher, loves to read. In this sentence, who is a teacher is a non-defining relative clause that tells us something about the speaker's mother. However, if we remove this information, the sentence would still make sense. Non-defining relative clauses are usually set off by commas, and they can be introduced by the same words as defining relative clauses. Now let's look at some examples. The car that I bought last week is already in the shop. The man who is wearing a blue shirt is my brother. The dog, which was barking loudly, woke up the whole neighborhood. I mentioned earlier that relative clauses can be introduced by a range of words. Let's take a closer look at these words and how they are used. Who and whom. Who and whom help refer to people. Who is used as the subject of the relative clause, while whom is used as the object. For example, the elderly woman who lives next door is an engineer. Here, who used as a subject of the relative clause. The doctor whom I saw was very friendly. Here, whom used as an object of the relative clause. In everyday speech, whom is becoming less common and many people use who instead. Whose. It refers to the person or thing that something belongs to. For example, the book whose cover is torn is still a great read. Or the man whose car was stolen reported it to the police. Which. Which is used to refer to things, not people. For example, the movie, which was directed by a famous director, won several awards. And that can be used to refer to both people and things. It is less formal than who and which, and it is often used in spoken English. For example, the restaurant that we went to last night was really busy. In this example, that referred to things, to a place. The dog that was barking loudly woke up the whole neighborhood. In this example, that refers to dog, to an animal, or we can say to a person, not a thing. Now that we know what relative clauses are and how they are introduced, let's look at how to form them. To form a relative clause, we need to follow these steps. Step 1. Identify the noun or pronoun that the relative clause will modify. Step 2. Choose the appropriate relative pronoun. Who, whom, whose, which, or that. Step 3. Insert the relative pronoun at the start of the relative clause. And step 4. Add the verb and any other necessary words to complete the clause. Look at an example. The elderly woman lives next door is a doctor. The noun we want to modify is woman. Here, we need to use who because we are talking about a person. We insert who at the beginning of the relative clause. Who lives next door, okay? And then we add the verb lives and any other necessary words to complete the clause. The woman who lives next door is a doctor. Got it? In English, the word order in a relative clause is different from the word order in a simple sentence. In a simple sentence, the subject comes before the verb, but in a relative clause, the relative pronoun comes before the verb. Let's look at an example. The man is a teacher. The man who lives in that house is a doctor. As you can see, in the simple sentence, the subject, which is man, comes before the verb is. However, in the relative clause sentence, the relative pronoun, which is who, comes before the verb lives. In addition to relative pronouns, we can also use relative adverbs to introduce relative clauses. The most common relative adverbs are where, when, and why. Let's look at some examples. The room where we stayed was very nice. So this relative adverb refers to places. The day when I met my best friend was unforgettable. In this relative adverb, a point in time is more precisely described. The reason why I'm late is because of the traffic. Here, a reason is more precisely described, okay? Now that we have covered the basics of relative clauses, let's look at some common mistakes to avoid. Using that instead of who or which. As I mentioned earlier, that can be used to refer to both people and things. However, it's important to use the correct relative pronoun to avoid confusion. For example, the woman that is a doctor. In this example, we should use who instead of that because we are talking about a person. So, the woman that is doctor is incorrect. Using non-defining relative clauses instead of defining clauses. It's important to use the correct type of relative clause to avoid changing the meaning of the sentence. For example, my sister, who is a doctor, lives in New York. My sister, who is a doctor, lives in New York. In the first example, the relative clause is non-defining, which means it provides additional information but is not essential. In the other example, the relative clause is defining, which means it is essential to the meaning of the sentence. We have to use this relative clause, okay? Misusing relative pronouns. It's important to choose the correct relative pronoun based on the noun or pronoun being modified. For example, the car who I bought last week is already in the shop. The car that I bought last week is already in the shop. In this example, we should use that instead of who, because we are talking about a thing, not a person, okay?